Every once in a while, I might give like an awareness/prevention type of meeting. And tonight I was planning on doing like a self-harm prevention/awareness.
Explain what self-harm is, will you?
Self-harm is self-inflicted injury of any sort, and I just wanted to make some sort of rules for when we're discussing self-harm or self-destructive behavior. I don't really want to get into specifics about it, such as forms, just plain self-harm or self-destructive behavior. Outside of, it just depends, because, some people get really triggered when they hear about self-harm or they see somebody self-harm or scars or whatever. I'm comfortable with it now. I've just gone through so much, training and classes about it.
Do you speak from experience? Sorry, Brad, got to be put on.
I do.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So, if say you know someone that, you can truly talk to about your self-harm, if you want to talk to me, that's fine, but going willy-nilly and just talking to, random people isn't the best idea, because that can be really dangerous. Because I've known a couple friends that have ended up in hospitals because they got triggered by somebody else's discussion about self-harm. And so it just really sucks, because if you get into specifics about it, it can be really dangerous.
I got to ask questions, Brad, I'm sorry, this is new to me, maybe other people don't understand, exactly where you're at. So if someone came to you and was asking you about self-harm, and how was that a trigger? Explain to me how that works.
Well, say someone comes to you, negative people feed off of negative energy. So, if I was, I am a depressed person, and say, I'm only, a week clean from self-harm, and somebody comes to me, and they're and they send me pictures of their self-harm, and they're like, oh, I just did this, what's up? And so you look at that, and you're like, oh, I don't necessarily know, it just triggers people, it just does. And so, with the groups that I've been in, it's always been a rule to not discuss self-harm outside of here, but I don't believe in that. I believe if you can trust a couple people with it, and you know that they won't get triggered, then that's good.
Is everybody cool with talking about this time?
Or we don't even have to get into that.
Right.
But another thing about self-harm, when we talk about it, we want to treat it as an addiction, because that's what it is. Self-harm is an addiction. It's just like being addicted to alcohol or any sort of drug or anything. That's really what it is. Heroin and any form of self-harm get compared a lot. We're Lexi's place, right? People are probably going to come to us, and I know that the fact that you're all at Lexi's place sort of tells me that we're all the therapists in our group of friends. And is that true for you guys? Do you end up being the therapist in your group of friends?
Yeah.
And end up having to deal with everyone else's
That's
shit?
between us. Yeah. A lot of us.
I mean, it's like that for a lot of people, regardless of whether they have a history of anything, of mental illness or any traumatic events. But it just happens. And so, the whole point of me kind of doing this is to, give you more understanding if you don't have that understanding beforehand. So self-harm's a complete addiction, and you can get addicted to it like you can get addicted to any drug or alcohol. I've personally been in rehab for both alcohol and self-harm. So, that was a while ago, and I'm a completely different person now. It can be ended. And a lot of times, self-harm ends up being romanticized or looked at as a form of beauty, but it's not. It's not something that should happen. But unfortunately, drugs and alcohol isn't really that bad, but I mean, obviously you can drink, but drink responsibly. But like, I mean, I wouldn't drink socially at all, but like, I'm not even going to get into that. But self-harm is an addiction that can be defeated. And, you know, people go into rehab for self-harm because it's treated as, it should be treated and discussed and thought of as an addiction. So, people have feelings regardless of why they have them. So say somebody gets in an argument with their parents and they end up harming themselves. If you come out right then and say that's a stupid reason to injure yourself, you kind of screw them over because that's called invalidation. You just have, like, as little as a problem as it may seem to you, it could be like the biggest thing in the world to them. So, like, it's hard because you want the problem to stop. So if they hurt themselves every time that, like, they argue with their parents or they argue with their boyfriend, girlfriend, or every time something like extremely little something extremely little happens to them and they hurt themselves or do something destructive, that needs to be taken seriously. So I don't even know where I'm trying to get with this. Just don't say to someone that you're stupid for feeling that way or you shouldn't feel that way. Because everybody feels the way they feel and you can't really like say that you shouldn't feel that way about this.
How do we handle it, Brett?
You could say like, I'm sorry you're feeling this way, insert emotion here. So I'm sorry you're feeling upset because your parents, you know, grounded you and it makes sense that you would be upset in this situation. Instead of saying, well, they only yelled at you, it's not that big of a deal. Because then that makes them feel like their emotions aren't real. So they feel bad about feeling bad. And that's just a complete waste of time for everyone. That's called invalidation. So validating someone would be saying, I'm sorry you feel this way. It makes sense. You know, what can I do to help? Blah, 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 blah. So validating, if they come to you saying they hurt themselves, or even if they come to you with any sort of emotion.
What helped you?
I went through it all on my own. I didn't really have anyone to talk to, and you know, it sucked, but I've gotten the help I've needed through doctors and doctors and doctors and doctors and hospitals and all the training courses I've taken and all the shit that I do outside of this. I pretty much cut out alcohol and self-harm out of my life at the same time. So I'm 4 months sober from both alcohol and self-harm.
Awesome. Awesome.
So, like, for me, I never really like talking about my shit. I never really like talking about my problems because shit happens and some people just don't like talking about it. And unfortunately, you have to understand that. And you could just give them whatever, you need to ask them, what can you do to help? And I mean, I might just be preaching to the choir right now because I don't know how you guys might handle things. But there are a couple things that like you can't do. One is invalidation. Another is just making your problem seem worse than theirs or somebody else's problem seem worse than them. So like if they come to you saying, oh, this happened to me and I'm really upset, and to me you it might be like a small deal and you're like, well, this really bad thing has been happening to me. And so why are you feeling upset about that when I'm barely upset about this? That's another form of invalidation. Or even saying, there are children starving in Africa. You could have it a lot worse.
I think everybody's heard that.
And it's ridiculous. I mean, that's a line, that's a classic line
That's kind of why I shut up.
from traditional, yeah, exactly, from traditional parents. Because they're like, oh, whatever, you know, I lived through this and that. So, like, why are you upset because of, you know, like your iPhone not working? That was a really stupid example, but bro, I get upset when my phone doesn't work. But, but like, that's just classic invalidation. Or when somebody, the classic phrase like, don't cry over spilled milk. That's a ridiculously invalidating statement. And it just needs to stop being said. Because right from the get-go, as young as that child is, it's being taught to them that the way you feel is not okay, regardless of how you feel about anything. So a correct thing for them to say would have been, it's okay, we can do this together. We can clean this milk up together. And people feel the way they feel. And feelings are always real, but they aren't always true. So you can always feel alone in a group of like 1,000 people. You can feel alone no matter what. But unless you have concrete evidence that you are lonely and that you are alone, then the feeling isn't true, but it is real, and it should be treated as a true feeling, although it's not really true. So I completely got off topic. Wow. Okay, self-harm, addiction. It's romanticized like crazy. Like on Tumblr all the time I see like these things like, oh, self-harm scars are just like a tiger earning their stripes or something. And that's just romanticizing it. And that makes people think it's okay to mutilate themselves, when in reality it's not. It's not a healthy way to deal with any sort of distress. But there's unlimited reasons for self-harm. It could be situational, or self-harm. I've read a couple scientific studies. Self-harm actually releases endorphins and dopamine, and those are the chemicals in your brain that makes you happy. So self-harm actually gives you a relief. And self-harm is not a good coping skill or a good relief. But a session of self-harm releases the same endorphins and dopamine as 30 minutes of exercise or 20 minutes of cuddling. So, it sounds weird, but physical contact with somebody releases those chemicals. And exercising definitely releases those chemicals. That's why in psych wards and in a lot of other places, physical health and mental health go hand in hand. It's just a natural thing. So if you just see like somebody who you think, oh, that person has no problems, that person has the perfect life, and honestly, they could be suicidal. They could have bipolar depression or schizophrenia. You don't know. You just don't. And it sucks because judging is a natural personal experience, but I had a friend come to me and she's like, all these thoughts are going through my head, I can't control them. And I pretty much told her, write the lyrics to your favorite song down. Take every other word and put them in alphabetical order. And basically she just gets so into doing that all the other thoughts that she has going through her head, she just isn't thinking about them. That's mindfulness. So if somebody goes to you in a time where they are having extreme self-harm, or if someone comes to you with urges, you can't invalidate them. You have to say, pretty much, you have to stop the problem before it starts. If they have never had a history of self-harm, you have to stop the problem before it starts. Because once you start it, you get addicted and then you can't stop. And then you start having withdrawals from self-harm. And shit happens. And it sucks. It really freaking does. And so many people get judged so often because of their scars, or just because people know they self-harm. And the term like emo or cutter or whatever, it sucks because they're going through hell in their mind, in their own mind. They're going through hell, and they're mutilating themselves for whatever reason, because they like the marks, or they like the feeling, or it gives them relief, or whatever. It can't happen. It's terrible. And people do it. People do drugs. And everybody knows that most drugs are extremely wrong to do. Most. Or all, whatever. But, like, it just needs to stop, and it sucks because people do it, and then me saying this might make them feel bad about doing it. And honestly, that's not a terrible thing because it just needs to stop.